Today we're going to be doing one of my favorite things, which is taking a look at an upcoming game that I think looks rather interesting. In today's video, that is going to be Black Myth Wukong. This was first revealed a few years back in August 2020, and this game pretty much immediately got a lot of attention. There were a lot of people really excited about it. I mean, just like millions and millions of views on various trailers and coverage of this thing. So what is it? Well, this is a narrative-focused, single-player, Soulsborne-inspired action RPG. The game tells the tale of Sun Wukong on his pilgrimage through Central Asia as told in the classic story Journey to the West. And so, as such, the entire game is just completely laden in Chinese mythology, which, can I just say, is a nice change of pace from like the classic medieval European-inspired setting that a lot of these games tend to be based off of. Now, they have said that the story told in this game is going to be a bit of a gritty and darker twist on the classic Chinese tale Journey to the West. And also, we should note, although this is called Black Myth Wukong, there's actually been no confirmation that the character we're playing is Sun Wukong. Instead, it may be another character on their trail or a character who is imitating them. We're not certain as of this moment, though. There have been hints to this in some of the dialogue and character interactions in the trailers we've seen. All right, so first off, I gotta say, one of the biggest standouts of this game has to be its visuals. Not just talking the cinematics either, because those look gorgeous, but the live gameplay as well. This is what most people have commented on during the game's initial reveal and subsequent coverage, and I think for good reason. It looks quite impressive. A lot of the effects, animations, models, everything looks really good and has only gotten progressively better with subsequent coverage. And I would say largely this is due in part to the fact that we have learned that they upgraded engines. Originally, the game was being developed on Unreal Engine 4, and then they made a swap sometime around early 2021 to Unreal Engine 5. And with that comes a host of new features that improve ray tracing, DLSS, and a whole assortment of other bells and whistles that, simply put, make things look really good. So yeah, visually, this game looks quite striking. Also, what's interesting here is that we have been told that the gameplay segments that we've seen are not pre-rendered, but rather recorded in-engine in real time, which again, all around, is quite impressive. Yeah, this game looks really, really good, and I think that is a large part of the reason the setting, the combat, and the visuals that this game has really caught a lot of people's eyes. But beyond the visuals, the next big standout thing about this title is got to be the game's action. It features, again, Soulsborne-inspired combat. This has been a direct reference mentioned by the developer. So that includes things like the variety of light and heavy attacks and different defensive options like parrying and dodging. Although all of it a bit more fast-paced. It looks a little more frenetic than what you would expect from a Soulsborne game from the recent released Elden Ring. Things are a little bit more quicker pace, a higher tempo, I would say. It's got a stamina meter that will deplete when you use any combat abilities, any attacks or defensive skills. And the game also features, interestingly enough, a system of stances which, depending on the stance that you're in, will alter your attacks, giving you access to different moves. So presumably this will adjust your light and heavy attacks, your charge attacks, any directional attacks, moving attacks, so on and so on. And from what we've seen, these stances do change where the character holds their staff in like the resting position. So we've seen one stance where the staff will be behind the back and another stance where it's out in front, and we know of at least those two as of this moment. Now, the main weapon in this game is a staff, but it's more than just a typical staff. It is a magic staff. It can transform. There's a special meter that fills up with dodges, blocks, and parries, and then filling that meter grants a charge which is used to enhance these special power staff attacks. We've seen a whirlwind attack, which will not only deal damage to anyone hit, but also can deflect projectiles. We've seen that there's a staff toss, like a boomerang ability, this extended offensive reach ability where the staff can grow, hitting enemies at a distance, jump attacks, sweep attacks, charge attacks with multiple tiers, doing more damage and being more effective the longer you hold it. We've also seen this really cool staff skill where the character will plant the staff in the ground and then elevate up into the air to dodge any ground-based abilities. This is really, really neat. Now, in the left-hand corner of the screen, you will notice the HUD for health, as well as a blue skill point meter and a yellow stamina meter. So again, the stamina meter, that depletes with attacks and defensive skills, but the skill point meter is tied directly into special abilities and spells. So yes, outside of the basic combat skills that you might expect, the game does have special abilities. We've we've seen things like an overshield that can be used to block attacks. We've seen a temporal freeze that will temporarily seize enemies in place. We've seen the character summon in an army of clones. And then also one of my favorites is this little protective ring of fire here, which can be used to basically buy yourself time if you want to regain some resources or heal yourself up. The game also has a dodge system, like I mentioned, but there looks to be perfect dodges where when you properly time it, it leaves behind a decoy. This, I would assume, is like the system of iframes in this game. There are healing items, some sort of equivalent of an Estus flask, which you will consume upon use. And obviously there will be some method of recharging this. We just are not certain as of yet how that is done. And also there were hints that stealth might be a thing in this game. At one point we see the main character sneak up to an enemy and then boot them off of a cliff. We'll have to see. And also, while talking about the game's combat, I do want to just quickly mention, from everything they've shown, it doesn't look particularly hard. I'm not entirely sure though. This could just be down to a difficulty. We do know that the game will have multiple difficulty options because an easier difficulty playthrough was mentioned. I'll touch on that in a little bit. But in the footage, the player will be getting hit with these what seem to be pretty massive attacks from bosses, and they look to barely take any damage. So hopefully this is just because the footage they've shown where it was played on an easy difficulty, but some of this stuff make the game look kind of face roll. But again, I can assume it's just because they wanted to showcase the full boss fights and not die and stuff like that. Anyways, let's move on. So one of the interesting things about this game, again, based on its setting and premise, one of the attributes of the Sun Wukong character is its ability to transform. And that is going to be a feature in this game as well. You can turn into various creatures. We've seen examples such as a flying bug, or specifically a golden cicada, which the character turns into to avoid some patrolling enemies. We've seen bits where the character is flying around as a bat, and then also turning into mythical creatures like this large, bulky monkey, or even there was a quick showcase of the character walking around as like this stone and skull abomination. Appeared to be like deflecting attacks. And it does appear from what we've seen that defeating certain enemies, at the very least some of these mini bosses, does unlock the ability for you to turn into them and gaining access to some of their unique attacks, attributes, movesets, and all of that. Now, all of these transformations do appear to be for a limited time. That is indicated by this ticking down meter in the left-hand corner of the UI, but just the fact that this game has this feature is really neat. And I know from the base mythology, like Sun Wukong can turn into like 70 plus different things. I don't know if we're gonna get 70 things in this game, but even just the fact that there is this like transformation thing adds a cool new twist and element to the gameplay. Let's talk about the enemies now. There is some really cool looking enemy design in this game. Now, there seems to be a usual mix of like enemy styles. So like there'll be large groups of weaker enemies, there'll be some mid-tier enemies, ranged and melee, more defensive or aggressive berserker types. And in terms of their appearance, they look to take on a variety of animal types. Like we've seen wolf creatures, monkeys, cats, rodents, bugs, all of different stylings and types. We've also seen these demons and these undead looking enemies. There are mini bosses. These will have larger health pools and more unique movesets than the basic enemies, but are still small in scale, kind of more akin to the size of your player character. But then there are also full-on large-scale boss fights, really reminiscent to the Souls franchise. We've seen a wide array of these already, actually, and they're pretty much what you expect. The bosses will have a variety of very telegraphed attacks. You can figure out by their wind-up and their posture what they're going to do, and ideally these patterns will be things you memorize and try to avoid. There's also a big health bar at the bottom of the UI to tell you where the boss is at, and the bosses will move through various phases as you work down their health. So in the very first trailer, we saw in its entirety this fight against a werewolf. He could leap into the air and do this ground slam. He had a few different types of like swipes and charges and lunge attacks. We saw him at one point actually licking a wound on his paw, which was this really cool, interesting moment, kind of added some character to the fight beyond the thing just going at you. He like hurt himself and started licking his wound. I thought that was neat. And then after dealing a bit of damage to it, the wolf actually leaps onto roofs of some of the nearby buildings surrounding the combat arena, and this is presumably tied directly to a phase change. In fact, right after he did that, things got a bit more aggressive and he seemed to have access to new abilities. And then in the second lengthier gameplay trailer, we saw a fight against this white Chinese dragon. This thing was infused with lightning. He had lots of like sweeping flyby attacks, would swipe with his claws. There was this lightning like ice breath attack, some tail style slams. We saw that he could slam his fist into the ground and hurl a line of lightning at you that you would have to dodge. And similarly, after dealing enough damage, we saw this dragon fall out of the sky, which opened up an attack window, and then moved into the second phase where, again, he becomes more aggressive and has access to new abilities. In fact, at this point, we saw him do this massive like shriek and a called down lightning that absolutely filled the entire arena, striking all over the place. And this is where we saw the player character use that special staff climbing attack where the staff would extend really high and he would climb all the way to the top. So those were the two like large boss fights we saw. We've also seen snippets of some other boss encounters. There was a fight against this lizard snake hybrid who was wielding a pole arm, spinning around doing venom attacks. We saw this giant beetle that would curl up and roll towards you, trying to squish you. An ogre that would call down lightning to enhance his weapon. We also saw things like these huge armored birds, these minotaur looking creatures, a massive possessed bear. And there was also in a cutscene, we got a look at this like massively oversized, almost mountainous enemies. This might be more akin to some God of War style encounters with just literally these bosses that take up entire screens. We haven't actually seen any of these encounters in action, just in cutscenes, but still clearly there are some super sized enemies or things in this game. And then also I should note, after defeating the larger bosses, both the big wolf and the Chinese dragon, there was triggered cutscenes. So clearly after you finish off these major set piece fights, some sort of cutscene will happen where you either finish them completely or something else takes place. They have said that the game will feature over 100 different enemy types. This does include the bosses. That's actually quite a large variety, so I'll be really interested to see what else they have in store for us beyond the, I don't know, 20 or so that we've seen at this point. Okay, now I want to move in to talk a bit about the world and the kind of the scope and scale of this game as we know it so far. So in the very first trailer, we actually got a look at the specific zone that was called Black Wind Mountain. Now later on, we learned that this is supposedly an early level in the game, and the developer says that this particular level takes roughly 30 to 60 minutes to play through on a normal difficulty, and this is actually where it was confirmed that there are multiple difficulties, presumably easy, normal, hard, maybe even higher tier than that. And in this first bit of footage, it also seemed pretty clear that this is not an open world game. I've seen referenced in places people saying that they thought this was an open world game, but in everything that we have seen, the actual gameplay, there's really nothing to imply that this is even remotely open world, or even that it has larger zones to explore. That said, it has been a nice variety of locations, from the very first forest region to seeing snow-capped mountains, and this is where we got a really good look at some interaction with snow that was rather impressive, again lending to the aesthetic and visual side of this game looking really good. We've also seen various desert biomes, and then all among these different kind of areas, plenty of structures and points of interest, from monasteries and towns to cities and caves and things like that. But I should say it does appear from what they've shown that this game is us moving through a straightforward path. We'll take out some enemies, we might encounter NPCs that will trigger a cutscene and relay some story, and then we move on clearing more enemies until we eventually get to some boss fight, be it a mini boss or one of those huge bosses in those larger arenas. Now, I will say, however, it is possible that the game has some more open areas and they just haven't shown it yet because it is so early in development. Like maybe we are going down these narrow paths and corridors that they've shown, and then at one point it could open up into this larger, more expansive city or some sort of open field or a ravine, or you're climbing a mountain with these big open spaces. But that said, everything they've shown has been very linear, has been very confined. Biggest spaces were just like the boss arenas against that white Chinese dragon. That's like the largest play space that we've ever seen. And even that was just like a big open field because the giant dragon was flying around. So we'll have to see if this game is any bit of open, but I would count on it being linear from what we know at this point. Some other interesting bits of information is, first of all, the game does have some environmental destruction. We've seen that in some of the encounters, things like walls and urns and various other objects just completely getting obliterated when attacked, when a boss charges into them or when you do one of your big attacks. So that's a pretty neat feature. Again, this is a single player game. However, the developer has mentioned that there could be online co-op. They haven't officially confirmed it yet, but it is a potential thing that's in the works. They were kind of beating around the bush in the response that I saw. And also, In terms of game length, they are quoted as saying it's going to be roughly 15 to 20 hours, which might be a bit shorter than you expect. I think this also lends credit to the idea that this is going to be a pretty linear experience. I want to touch on the developer. It's a studio by the name of Game Science. This was actually co-founded by people who were previously working at Tencent, but they wanted to step away from what they were working on, which was predominantly mobile and free-to-play focused titles, which is very common in the region, and instead wanted to develop a premium PC and console first style game. And when they started development, the team consisted of roughly 30 people, and that made up a large part of who worked on that very first trailer. However, since releasing that trailer, they got quite a lot of attention and then reportedly got north of 10,000 resumes sent into them, from which they do intend and have since hired more people to help with the game's development and adding more content to it. And that could also coincide potentially with the scale of things getting pushed up, who knows. In terms of when this game is expected to release, when can you play it? Well, it is currently in alpha. It's been in development for about 4 years at this point. Now, they were originally supposedly aiming to release in 2023 at some time, but as of yet, there has actually been no release window officially announced, so I would not count on 2023 unless we get confirmation at some point later this year. Again, it is planned to come to PC and console, and this is also supposed to be the first of 3 planned games in the Black Myth trilogy, I guess. So first Black Myth Wukong, and then Black Myth for some other character, presumably. And also, they have mentioned that they are hoping this is the start of a brand new franchise, but also a larger universe. The developer has touched on things like and compared it to the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Hey, reach for the stars, I guess. Yeah, if you're gonna make something and you and you want it to be successful, why not pick one of the most successful money printing things out there? The Marvel Cinematic. Okay, yeah. Go for it. Why not? I don't know. And how much is this likely to cost? Well, they have said that the game is being sold as a one-time full box price purchase, so we'll expect that to be $60 or $70. And they also mentioned that there could be DLC and there could be in-game purchases. No specifics as to what that could be. Let's assume it's cosmetics. They did also say they will never sell power. So there you go. You know, there's still a lot not known about this game, but I gotta say, from everything we've seen and the bits of information we do know, but just specifically the gameplay, the footage, it looks really good. It looks like a pretty impressive Soulsborne inspired game. I like more open games, but I'm not against a linear experience. That does appear to be what this is going to be. But, you know, again, who knows? There's still a lot to know about this game. But from everything we've seen, looks pretty fantastic, and I totally get why so many people showed some early interest in this title and why there was a lot of excitement behind it. But that's going to do it for me today. As always, thank you all so much for watching. Hope you enjoyed the video. I'll see you in the next one. Take it easy.